was buried.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're descending into the crushing, pitch-black depths of the Pacific Ocean. We're here to uncover a really terrifying truth, the actual origin behind the absolute loudest underwater sound ever recorded by human beings. Let's dive in.
Imagine for a second that you're in a completely dark room. So dark you can't even see your own hands in front of your face. Your ears are on high alert, right? And then, suddenly, you hear this massive, bone-vibrating roar echoing from the abyss right beneath you. It's a sound that completely defies logic. And honestly, it's the kind of sound that makes you realize just how utterly isolated you truly are.
Well, in the summer of 1997, scientists at NOAA detected exactly that. They picked up a sound so unbelievably powerful, it was recorded by underwater microphones that were more than 5,000 kilometers apart. Now, just to put that into perspective for you, that is literally like someone screaming in Madrid, Spain, and being heard perfectly clear all the way over in Moscow.
So, Chapter 1, A Scream in the Dark.
To understand how we even managed to hear this anomaly, we actually have to look back at the remnants of the Cold War. And that brings us to SOSUS, or the Sound Surveillance System. It was this vast array of highly sensitive underwater microphones, originally deployed by the US Navy to track Soviet submarines. Eventually, these deep-sea sensors were pretty much abandoned by the military and loaned out to science, mostly just quietly listening to ocean currents. That is, until they picked up this strange, low-frequency rumble. It lasted barely a minute, but it was a sound that defied all logical explanation. When geophysicist Dr. Christopher Fox analyzed the recording, he noticed something genuinely chilling. You see, mechanical noises, things like a boat engine or an underwater explosion, they maintain a pretty constant frequency, or they just drop off abruptly. But this mysterious sound, it rapidly increased in frequency over that minute. It looked organic. In fact, it perfectly matched the acoustic signature of a living, breathing creature just taking a massive breath and letting out a deep scream. Marine biologists were absolutely stunned by this. The sound profile looked so suspiciously like the vocalization of a marine animal, but the scale of it was totally unprecedented. It wasn't just big, it was titanic. Because the crucial point here is the math. For a biological entity to produce a roar loud enough to be heard 5,000 kilometers away, it would need to be roughly 250 meters long. To put that in perspective, that size makes the massive blue whale look like a tiny goldfish. If this thing really was an animal, it was a monster. Which leads us to Chapter 2, The Coordinates of Terror. So, while researchers were struggling to explain the impossible physics of this sound, internet sleuths and cosmic horror fans noticed a deeply, deeply unsettling geographical coincidence. The sound was actually triangulated to a super remote point in the South Pacific. And get this, it was shockingly close to exactly where author H.P. Lovecraft placed the mythical, sunken city of his sleeping monster, Cthulhu, almost 70 years earlier. The human brain loves to find patterns. So this sudden collision between hard ocean science and literal myth, it was terrifying for a lot of people. It really forces the question, if the sound actually was biological, what colossal creature was hiding down there in the abyss? This single question kept the world in suspense for years. It completely blurred the line between marine biology and a science fiction nightmare. People were wondering, was it an undiscovered giant squid? Some prehistoric leviathan? Or maybe something worse? All right, Chapter 3, Physics of the Abyss. To really act as forensic investigators here, we need to strip away the myth for a second and look at the terrifying physical realities of the deep ocean. First off, how did a sound travel that incredibly far? The answer is something called the SOFAR channel, which stands for sound fixing and ranging. Think of it as this really deep layer of ocean water where the cold temperatures and massive pressures create basically an infinite acoustic corridor. The ocean is an amazing conductor of sound, and this specific channel perfectly preserved the horrific intensity of the anomaly, acting like an acoustic internet that let it travel thousands of miles without losing its energy. But honestly, here's where the whole sea monster theory kind of drowns. A 250-meter-long beast faces some absolutely impossible physical challenges. For one, the crushing oceanic pressure at those depths would completely destroy the massive lung cavities required to even make a roar like that. Plus, there just isn't enough marine biomass in the ocean to feed an apex predator of that size. I mean, trying to sustain a marine Godzilla would collapse the entire oceanic food chain. And eventually, a creature like that would need to surface for oxygen. Yet, nobody has ever seen anything.
Moving on to Chapter 4, the Icequake Revelation.
So, as it turns out, the truth wasn't found by looking closer at biology, but by looking south. Sometime between 2005 and 2012, NOAA deployed a brand new network of hydrophones much closer to Antarctica. And finally, the camera, so to speak, was pointed in the right direction. But listening in on the Bransfield Strait and the Scotia Sea, scientists started capturing thousands of very similar sounds. Then, in early 2008, they acoustically tracked a specific iceberg, called A53A, as it disintegrated. And that's when they finally identified the true culprit. It wasn't an animal at all. It was actually a massive iceberg cracking and breaking away from an Antarctic glacier. Let's just quickly break down the anatomy of what they call an icequake. When these enormous skyscraper-sized blocks of ice tear away and start to fracture under their own immense weight, the ice literally groans. It generates all these multiple microfractures. And the violent release of energy from that massive initial crack unleashes these ultra-low frequency waves directly into the SOFAR channel. And surprisingly, that physical process perfectly mimics a deep biological oceanic scream.
But you might be wondering, why did it sound so alive? Well, that is due to something called auditory pareidolia. It's this fascinating psychological phenomenon where your brain basically tricks itself into hearing a biological intention, or like a breath, inside of an entirely inanimate physical noise. All those microfractures of the collapsing ice created this acoustic signature that just totally tricked our brains. We heard a monster because the sound was just too immense and too complex to seem inanimate. So our minds just went ahead and filled in the terrifying blanks.
Which brings us to Chapter 5, the monster that does exist.
You know, science didn't actually kill the mystery of the bloop. I'd argue it simply exchanged a fictional sea monster for a very real, very terrifying natural wonder. There's a saying, the worst monsters are those we bring with us. The whole myth of the bloop was really fueled by our own psychological need to believe that the world is still this magical, incredibly dangerous place harboring dark secrets. In a strange way, we kind of wanted a sea monster because the alternative, a cold, totally indifferent physical reality, is actually way more isolating. The actual reality of the bloop is far more imposing than any giant squid could ever be. It wasn't an animal. It was raw geophysics in action. It's a symphony of climate change and absolute proof of a living, wildly dynamic planet. At the end of the day, we are just passengers on a spaceship called Earth. We're riding on a planet that groans and fractures and violently shifts beneath our feet. And it's completely, entirely indifferent to our existence. And while there might not be a 250-meter Leviathan hiding down there in the abyss, the sheer fact that the simple movement of ice can violently shake the acoustic foundations of our entire planet, well, it leaves us with a pretty chilling realization. The ocean is far, far more unknown than humanity wants to admit. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought. If a shifting block of ice can sound exactly like a massive monster breathing in the deep, what other sounds are actually waiting for us down there in the dark?